Welcome to Basic Black at the Boston Public Library. I'm Donna Latson Gittens, your host. Our conversation today is about food foraging. Foraging has piqued the curiosity of people and people of color to not only explore nature, but also educate themselves about foraging along neighborhood trails, parks, and even in their own backyards, as a way to connect with their cultural heritage. Notable foragers include African American abolitionist Harriet Tubman and agricultural scientist and inventor George Washington Carver. To learn more about foraging, join me today is Maria Pinto, a writer, educator, and forager. She considers herself a mushroom enthusiast. We're also joined by Jerel Ferguson, a forager, gardener, herbalist, and an urban farmer. He is also the community outreach manager for Speak for the Trees in Boston. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us here.
When I heard that this was going to be today's topic, I was like, okay, I'm really going to learn something new, because I knew about foraging from a restaurant point of view that, restaurants have people who go out and gather up herbs and mushrooms and that kind of thing, but I didn't know there were Black people who were doing this. So I'll start with you, Maria. How did you get into doing foraging?
Yeah, so I've always sort of been interested in being close to the land and getting my food as fresh as possible, like straight off the tree. I'm Jamaican, and back home in Jamaica, we just would pick fruit off the tree and pick herbs right off the bush. So in recent years, it became apparent that there were all sorts of things to learn about the land here in the Boston area. And I went out with an Eastern European friend. In Poland, mushroom foraging is a national pastime for them. So she taught me some of the basics, and then I quickly just became obsessed.
Oh, that's fun. Jerel, how did you get involved in foraging?
I started from hiking. I was spending a lot of time in the woods, and I was trying to figure out how I could spend more time out there without food. So I just decided to start looking at the plants that were around me and figuring out and learning which ones that I would be able to eat to survive in the woods if I needed to.
So would you consider yourself both self-educated, or did you take special training, or?
I'm self-educated, yes. I've done a lot of reading, a lot of research online. I've been out with people who have more experience than I have, so yes.
I would say that I started out looking in books, and then online forums are really, really great for making sure that you have, what you think you have, especially with, some of the more dangerous forageables or dangerous things that you shouldn't forage from the mushroom kingdom. So it was a mixture of guidebooks and online fora and joining the Boston Mycological Club, which we have locally. It's the oldest running mycological society in the country, I think.
Wow. So many years ago, there were oppressive laws put in place to keep Black and Indigenous people from actually foraging. It was a way to keep them from gaining wealth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So these insidious laws during Reconstruction era, when Black folks had been obviously dispossessed by the institution of slavery, and then were trying to figure out a way to survive with the land, and looking to Indigenous folks, brothers and sisters, to sort of like round out that knowledge, but then sort of being excluded from the public lands that they had always foraged from when these laws were enacted.
I think it's fascinating when you think about the things that Black people, especially during slavery, would take as cast-offs and make into real food, and now all of a sudden they're delicacies. Can you talk a little bit about that, Jerel?
That's kind of a tricky one for me. I'm not really, I think about that as when the cast-offs, you mean like?
Well, chitlins, all kinds of foods that they didn't use. They kept the bulk of the good meat and just gave us the cast-offs. And then somehow, creatively, we came up with things that are now delicacies that everybody wants. So I don't know if you want to address that, Maria.
Well, especially from sort of a mushroom cookery perspective, it's interesting to me the ways that folks have been able to creatively supplement the cast-offs that you're talking about, those bad cuts of meats, and make something truly sort of delicious out of it. I think about that all the time when I think about sort of creative ways of dressing up the food that you've been given. So I think a lot about this during the winter when, you know, there's slim pickings out there. The idea of making like a mushroom umami sort of seasoning out of the things that I foraged back in the, you know, autumn. And there are all sorts of ways to like make it fancy, jazz it up.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about mushrooms a little bit, and I want to get into that a little deeper, but what other kinds of things would you forage for?
You could forage for dandelions. There are things, it's called stinging nettles. There are lots of wild berries and nuts that are out there that a lot of people aren't aware of that you could consume. There are, I just want to talk about berries really quick. There's a lot of wild berries that are native here to Massachusetts, like the raspberry. There's also currants, there's gooseberries, even blueberries. You can find those out in the wild. One of my favorite times was discovering a bunch of raspberries when I was out with a group of people. Mm-hmm. So that was a really great
Now, when you
experience.
do that, do you eat it right there on the spot, or you gather it up and bring it home, or you do both?
You do both. You can, if you're prepared to bring it home with you, that's fine. But normally, while we're right out there, we just pick it right off the vine and eat it right then and there. Some things will store better, mm-hmm. but when we find it, we try to consume it right then and there. That way, we'll get all of the natural benefits from it as well.
Right then. Yep. And how about you? Outside of mushrooms, what other items you might forage for?
Yeah, stinging nettle is one of my favorite wild greens. It's just so like unctuous. When you boil it, it almost makes it its own broth, and it's a great sort of medicinal tea. I like to forage. I'm just now getting into the idea of foraging amaranth, wild amaranth. So callaloo is actually amaranth, and I was joking with my mom that, you know, even though I'm up here in the frozen north, I can get this thing, you know, this Jamaican green that just grows wild here, especially in Western Mass, but a little bit around here as well.
So you bring up a good point. You're from the Caribbean, your people are from Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Where in the Northeast do you forage? What are some of the places that people could go to start this?
I would say with the Great Blue Hills, the Blue Hills reservations are a wonderful place to start. Even in the closer urban community, Franklin Park has an amazing amount of foraging opportunities. There's a lot there. You know, not necessarily on each path, but you kind of have to go a little bit deeper into the woods to find something that's safer at least to consume than you would along the pathways. Also the Boston Nature Center, which is in Mattapan. There's a lot of foraging there that you can do. And I'm sure there are a lot of other places like local parks that you can, you know, venture away from the walkways and go into the trees. And if you know what you're looking for, then that makes it easier for you.
Well, that is the thing. You want to speak to that? Know what you're looking for?
Know what you're looking for is so important. With plants also, but like mushrooms, obviously being able to look at those guidebooks, have friends that also know what they're doing, check with experts. It's really, really important to be able to get pictures of the mushroom in the place where you found it, so we can tell what trees it's growing with, get a picture of the underside of the cap, and then send it to one of your friends like me, and, you know, make sure that you've found it maybe even a couple of times before you actually set down to consume it.
Right. I think one of the things that has me a little unnerved is pesticides or, you know, foraging where there are dog parks or dogs have been or any wild animals. So how do you mitigate that?
Well, I highly recommend at least 10 to 15 feet away from any sidewalks, any pathways, walkways, anywhere that there's dog activity. You don't want to forage near the edges. Right. You know, that would be an unpleasant surprise if you found something that you wanted. But you have to go a little bit further in, away from, like I said, away from the pavement. You can even, you know, you just have to be very careful. You have to be cautious about where you're picking.
Yeah, there's some common sense stuff like, if it's close to the road, you're dealing with runoff from the road and road salts and all that kind of stuff. You're dealing with people using paths regularly for walking dogs. But again, like Jerel said, going a little bit deeper off the beaten path will help you to just sort of be able to sense, like a common sense way of knowing where you should harvest from.
And is there any way to test if there's pesticides on any of the things that you're foraging for or you're eating?
Not that I know of. There may not be a way. There may be a way to test that, but usually if you're not in a area that's usually like groomed, like a lawn that's manicured or anything like that, and you're in the woods, you don't really have to worry about that. Sometimes you can take into consideration the amount of acid rain that we may get. That may affect the plants or flowers that we find, but typically you're safe from pesticides.
So one of the things that I really wonder about is how do you just go and pick something? Have you ever had a situation, trial and error, you made a mistake? And what was that like?
I have, yes.
Jerel says, I really don't want to talk about that.
Oh, there's a plant, chamomile, and then there's an oxeye daisy. They're similar in appearance, but different. I found a batch of oxeye daisies and I thought they were chamomile, and I ate it and I paid for it later.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So I mean, it's always being able to correctly identify what you're going to put in your mouth. Know what it is before you even touch it.
Right.
Because there are a lot of lookalikes.
Right.
Like the chamomile and the oxeye daisy, and there's a lot of plants that will take you out.
How about you?
I am way more afraid of plants than I am of mushrooms, I will say. There are a couple of deadly toxic mushrooms that grow in our area, but the one time that I poisoned myself a little bit was with a plant, and it was in my own yard, and it was because I didn't really know what the tenants prior had been growing in their garden, and I thought it was asparagus. It looked exactly like asparagus.
Wow.
It was not asparagus, and I felt very badly for the rest of the day.
Wow. So what kinds of tools should people have? One, in terms of research, books or articles or websites that they can go to, and then what kinds of tools do you take out when you're foraging?
I have a couple of pocket-sized field guides. Mushrooms of the northeastern United States is one of them. It's great, especially for beginners. It has all the toxic lookalikes for the main species that you're going to want to start with. I also use a couple of apps. Mushroom Observer is a really great tool for just checking what you have against all of the pictures of all of the experts, in the area. And then another one is iNaturalist, and that one is not very good for mushroom identification. So I would caution people against using that, especially if they're trying to eat what they find. But it's really just great for being able to see what has grown in that area historically, because it keeps a log of all of that good stuff.
I also use Foraging Guides. I also use a plant identifier. It's called Plant Net. And you take a picture, and it's like iNaturalist. You take the picture, and it tells you what the plant is. It lets you know if it's dangerous or not. But also the foraging guides really come in handy. If you do, I've been doing it for quite a while now. Not to say that I know all the plants, because I do not, but I have a general idea of what grows here in the Northeast. And there are other different places where similar plants that grow up here grow, like in Georgia, for instance. I've had some of the best wild edible plants down in Georgia that I didn't know were down there, but they were up here. But just being able to identify and know what you're looking for.
So foraging clearly has been a trend. People want to get outside, they want to get exercise. So why are there so few people of color who are in this field? And if do you think that it's growing? Do you think that they're starting to get into the swing of things about this?
Yeah.
I think it is growing, definitely. But Maria said earlier about the Western versus Eastern medicine type of approach to things. A lot of people, black people, I would just say, are not really willing to give up, their doctor quite yet, to start doing things for themselves, trying to go back to the earth to find plants for medicine. I think that people are catching on to it, though. I would say, like during COVID, I had a lot of inquiries about, hey, let's go outside, let's go try to find what type of plants that will help us, fight against this thing. But it's a very small crowd.
I think the popularity of someone like Alexis Nicole Nelson, Black Forager on TikTok, she has like 2 million followers.
Right.
People are really, really starting to clue into the fact that this food is out there and it's out there for free, and you can practice food sovereignty by having your own store of mushrooms, to last you through the winter or whatever, dry them up. I think that the there being a bit of a taboo around picking your own food, or even sometimes growing your own food because it's seen as something that poor people do, has kept us distant from some of these traditions. But I think folks are starting to see that, when supply chains can't be relied on to bring you the food that you need, it's extremely empowering to be able to go out and do for yourself.
But foraging could never take the place of a food pantry, or trying to, because it happens in small amounts. Gardening is a different story.
Right,
but
right.
Foraging really can't take the place of a food pantry, right?
It's true.
It's because you have to be ethical when you're foraging. You don't want to take too much from the land, or it may not grow there anymore. So it won't take the place of the supermarket or anything like that. But one thing that I do say to people is, what do we do if all the supermarkets are closed? Where are you going to go for food? I got to tell them, you got to go either learn how to grow your own food or go to the forest.
So can you tell us some of your favorite areas? I think you mentioned Franklin Park and Mattapan, the Nature Center. How about you, especially for mushrooms, where do you go?
Yeah. Franklin Park is one of the first places that I foraged mushrooms that other people actually let me cook for them. So during Thanksgiving meal, I foraged some brick caps from Franklin Park. But some spots that folks don't even necessarily know about in the area, Hammond Pond Reservation behind the Chestnut Hill Mall.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's where we met.
Yeah. It's tea accessible, which is great. Stony Brook Reservation is another place that I found lots of good stuff. Some spots, again, using common sense along the Emerald Necklace even. There's a beautiful chanterelle spot that might even be producing right now, since we got a little bit of rain in the Emerald Necklace. So yeah, there are all sorts. You don't even have to really necessarily go into the woods. There are parks where, again, you can exercise caution and common sense and see this area is groomed, so I probably won't pick from there, but a little bit in the trees, if there's like a copse of trees, it's useful to just check.
So one of the big things, and we talked about this before we went on air, is the drought. How has that impacted foraging and climate change in general?
Well, I could talk about that all day, but I know we don't have all day. But it has affected us tremendously. As a city of Boston is one of the highest temperature heat islands in the country, and the lack of trees and the excessive amount of no rain, days without rain, has really done a number on farms, gardens, the woods, because I know mushrooms need a lot of water. But it's been really hard because everything is dried up. Challenged, excuse me.
Yeah.
Everything is just really challenged because everything's dry. Even our lawns are brown and crispy.
Oh yeah. How do you, Maria?
Yeah, I've had to cancel a couple of walks where folks were sort of more interested in the big fleshy fruit bodies. Those aren't existing right now. Those really need a lot more water than we've been getting.
Well, we've had an awesome conversation, and I think I've learned an awful lot. I'll leave it to you for the moment, and maybe we'll get back together again and talk about it.
Absolutely.
We are out of time, but this has been a great discussion. I hope you all have enjoyed it too. Thank you to Maria Pinto and Jerel Ferguson, and be sure to catch this discussion on our social platforms and follow us to see these conversations and other content online. This has been Basic Black at the Boston Public Library. And again, thank you both for being here, and we'll see you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day.